Welcome to the Digital Marketing Mentor. I'm your host, Danny Gavin, and together with industry leaders and marketing experts, we'll explore the meeting point of mentorship and marketing. We'll discover how these connections have affected careers, marketing strategies, and lives. Now get ready to get human. Hello, I'm Danny Gavin, founder of Optage, marketing professor, and the host of the Digital Marketing Mentor. Today we have Ameet Khabra, founder and owner of Hopskip Media, based out of Vancouver, British Columbia, and for those who don't know, Canada. Ameet has over 16 years of experience in digital marketing. She is the founder and owner of Hopskip Media. She's a former Google Partners Ambassador and Rising Star. Ameet has spoken at many top digital marketing conferences, including Hero Conference and Brighton. She also regularly contributes to Search Engine Journal and has been nominated several times as one of the most influential PPC professional. Today, we're going to talk about paid search, AI in paid search, agency leadership, and of course, mentorship. How are you doing, Ameet?
I am fantastic. How are you?
Good. I'm doing well. It's always fun to speak with people who are about at the same timeline of me. So I've started professionally in around 2010, similar to you. We both run agencies. So it's always nice to speak to real peers. So I'm so glad you're here.
I know, because then you're just like, well, how do you do this? And then
But as we know, in our industry, there's a lot more friends than foes,
Definitely true. Definitely. I don't think I've ever walked up to a PPC and asked a question and then them turn around and be like, I'm not answering that. I think we've got a really great community. It's quite amazing. I love it.
All right. So let's jump in. Where did you go to school and what did you study?
It's called Kwantlen Polytechnic University. It was technically a community college before I got there, and then they upgraded to Polytechnic, which I have no idea what that means, and never bothered finding out because I was like, who really cares? Originally, I was in school for business administration with a minor in entrepreneurial leadership, and I took one macro class and went, this is not for me. I don't want to do this. Then I tried with microeconomics and it still made no sense. So eventually I took all my credits and was like, marketing. This is where most of my credits go. And that's kind of basically the origin story of how I ended up here. 3-hour class in computer sciences where he was going over email marketing, content, Google Ads, analytics, and for whatever reason, and I think it was certification related because they had the Google Ads and analytics certifications. I think I wrote that down because of that reason. And then a year and a half, maybe 2 years later, I opened the book up and went, oh, I should probably try doing this. Hey. And then that was the end of it. Then eventually I started actually working for not other agencies. I started working at a car dealership. Basically, they owned and sold car dealerships in a sense. And then I ended up in an agency and then started my own somehow. So all of it actually stems from my origin story of how I got here also stems from school.
That's amazing. And I also know you have an audio engineering and production diploma from the Pacific Audiovisual Institute. You want to tell me about that?
For a quick second, I thought I could be the next Skrillex. I was obsessed with EDM at that point, and then for whatever reason, I was like, you know what? Let's try this out. I've always loved music. I don't really have a natural talent, unfortunately. My dad is I think he's a very gifted singer. So I think I get the musical love from him, but I did not get the talent, unfortunately. So I was like, let's try this. And that was right after I finished the marketing diploma or certificate or whatever I had done. And I remember when I walked into class, everybody was just like, who is this person? Why is she here? And then they all got to the last semester and realized that business was a big thing. And they were like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, I had a vision. Y'all didn't see it. And I'm like, and now you're paying catch up and I don't have to. And I'm like, we're cool. So it was interesting. It was just kind of one of those things where I was like, I kind of want to try it. And I went for it. And I actually ended up doing some work in sound design instead, because I'm very a regimented person. I love accuracy and everything. So being able to do sound effects and have it teed up to someone kicking rocks, it just fed that side of me that needs that precision so well. So I excelled in that role. But in terms of the musical producing side of things, I was more of someone who organized it versus being the person who was actually maybe we should try that take again, because I did not hear what was wrong with it.
But I love how adventurous you were, right? Trying different things out and seeing what works for you. That's really, really awesome. So when you look at your experiences, both inside and outside the classroom around those times, right, when you were at those two universities or colleges, any other experiences that you look back and be like, ooh, that kind of paved my way to how I do things today?
I think it's just naturally how I've always kind of been very inquisitive, asking a lot of questions. So when I was in school, I was the dorky one who stayed back after class just to talk to the professor, the instructor, whoever it was, ask some random questions that made no sense for me to ask. And then years later, I was like, oh, yeah, Kim told me that. Or, yeah, Danny told me that. Or, yeah, that guy told me that. And I'm like, oh, interesting. It was just like this weird way that I was building these blocks without realizing it. Yeah, so I think for me, it was more or less of just being that person who constantly was just asking those random questions.
And you know what's so cool? You're not the first person, like successful digital marketer, who's told me like they were the one who stayed back and asked the professor questions. I've actually hired, I mean, I don't know if you know, but I'm a professor also. So I've actually hired students because of that. Like they're actually coming up and asking those additional questions. Like they're just the ones who, stand out a little bit more and care a little bit more. And that could make a huge
Mhm.
difference.
It really does, especially if they're saying, "Hey, I know your time is valuable. I just want to ask you these really specific questions and stuff like that." I think that really has the mark of someone who has thought about it. And that's how I've always operated. So when I started in the community, it was still on Google Streams. I don't know if everybody remembers Google Streams from back in the day. Oh, it was like, yeah, Google's version of trying to compete with Meta, but it just never did. But they had the Google partner community on there. And that's how I just randomly somehow found it one day. And I would just sit there and I would post questions and be like, okay, so I tried this, and this. None of it worked. What's the answer? And I think the reason why people were so like quick to help me was because they're like, you've tried, you've attempted, you just unfortunately were not successful. Therefore, I'm going to help you, right? Because we want to help people who have tried. We don't want to help people who have given up. So I think that was kind of like the difference where I was able to get like that early buy-in because I was just so motivated to find the answer and was just looking for somebody to help me find the answer versus giving it to me.
So, Amit, how would you define a mentor?
For me, I think mentorship is more or less of just having somebody there when I need those questions to kind of like gently guide me, kind of like a therapist in a sense. I don't want somebody to tell me what to do. I want them to maybe look back at what they've done and then kind of and I don't know if this is like the analyst in me, but I just want somebody to trigger thoughts. Like I can see things from 20 different angles in a split second, but sometimes I don't know where to start. And I think having a mentor for me has always been really valuable in getting someone to help me start thinking about it. I don't necessarily need them to get me to the finish line. I just need them to get me to start. If they can help me to the finish line, of course, I would love it. But I think it's more or less for me, it's the start of it. How do I find someone to help me think differently?
So let's talk about some of your most influential mentors. Let's start with your first mentor, Julie Friedman.
So yeah, we met on when it was still Twitter. I'm still going to be calling it Twitter because I don't care. Um, I don't care enough to call it
As
the other
long as you
name.
don't call it Google AdWords, then I'm okay with you calling it Twitter. So we're fine.
I mean, I'm still the AdWords girl online.
I know. Whoops, I got to be careful.
I love that one. I always open all of my presentations with like, I'm aware it's called Google Ads. I still like the name a lot. So we're keeping it, guys. Like, just but yeah, it was back in Twitter many years ago. PPC chat was just another place where I was just trying to find more community, especially when the Google partners community they moved on to something called Lithium, and it just wasn't, I just didn't like it. It just didn't work for me. So I was basically just looking for like a new place to talk about ads, actually, basically, just because my local community, I was kind of the only one who did ads at that time. So then it was just like me standing around lone wolf, like, who do I talk to? And at that point, you're just kind of going down and just being like, well, I can talk to myself, but that's not as interesting, right? So I went and found PPC chat, and naturally Julie came with that package, and I'm so glad that she did, because she was just like, I think for her, it was the way that she kind of approached me was with so much kindness. And it's not different than what I've experienced from this community, but it was just still different. I don't know how to explain Julie unless you've like spoken to her or met her in some way. She's just got this really lovely touch to her that it just makes you feel like you're in a very safe spot, that you're with a very safe person. Almost kind of feels like home. It's like what I like to kind of equate it to. And so I got to sit around talking to her for about random stuff, whether that be life or PPC stuff. And then eventually the pandemic hit. And that's when my communication with her increased significantly. And that's when my participation in PPC chat started to increase significantly as well. Because I had felt like, I'm like, okay, there's this one person who literally runs the show and she's making it evident that she somewhat believes in me in whatever capacity somehow I've convinced her to. That now I feel a little bit more confident to go out and start talking to all these people who I feel are basically the real deal. I would say that like she's the reason why I'm in the position I am now. Like the confidence that she gave me is the reason why I'm here.
So kind of like without having that person, you're always like second guessing yourself. Do I really know what I'm talking about? Can I really go out there? But she basically like kind of gave that stamp of approval. Like, yeah, you can do it.
Yeah. And especially somebody who was highly regarded, right? So that's the other half of it. If it was anybody else off like of Twitter, I don't know if I would have cared as much. It was the person who was actively, the PPC chat is Julie, right? And like everybody just loves and adores her so much. And I saw that even online where I was just like, okay, if this person has like some kind of inkling of like like I'm worth, I mean, it's going to sound bad, but like I'm worthy of this conversation, then I'm going to take it and not try to squander the opportunity that's been given to me.
Yeah. And I wasn't trying to say like it's just some random Twitterer, right? Like,
No.
No, I know. I was just saying like, because yeah, you might think that, yeah, like some Twitter person said it. No, like Julie is truly amazing. And it's amazing that you were able to connect that bond with her and have that bond continue to today. Mm-hmm. So let's move on to your current director. I believe you pronounce his name Idris Fashan.
Yeah. I think that's exactly how you would say it. I say Idris, like the Anglo way, but like I've heard him say it that way before. So
I guess it's my Hebrew language in me. What can I say? Tell me why has he been a mentor to you?
I think our meeting, our story, or like our origin story is kind of the cutest thing on the planet. Both agency, I think he got hired maybe like a month after me, 2 weeks, like very, very short time period. And at that time we were all in our own little cubbies. So I was sitting here, he was sitting right behind me. Like he just got placed there. So every morning I'd just turn around and obviously I am who I am. And I'd be like, hello, what are you doing? And then I would have like these snacks of like goldfishes. And he hated them when we first met. And I used to like shove them down his throat until now he has like 3-4 bags in his house, like he at all times because of me. But like just turning around and having those conversations every morning with somebody who wasn't stuck in a cubby was really like how everything kind of started. He's content or comes from a content background and then eventually moved off and started doing all of these other things. But I think his mentorship really started happening when I left the agency, where he and I don't know what kind of continued us to keep in contact, but something did. We would meet for coffee and I'd tell him what I was up to. And then he'd be like, okay, well, your brand needs like an actual identity. Like your brand needs this, your brand needs that. And then we would sit in coffee shops doing these random little things. And I remember at one point, it's just kind of funny to see it almost kind of come true now, where I sat there and I was like, I want us to be a content house that just happens to do PPC. That was always kind of the mission. And then obviously being by yourself, there's only so much you can do. And then when you're floundering a little bit, there's only so much you can do. And now we're kind of in this cool position where we're almost kind of starting to move towards that. And now I get to look back at him and be like, this is what we were working at. Like, this was what we were talking about 7 years ago. It's finally happening. So it's just really cool to have somebody like him who obviously always had my best interests at heart, but always kind of came in, was like, okay, let's just you did this. Let's just do a little bit of an iteration. He always kind of pushed me. I like people when they push me, and he always did that. So for me, he'll always kind of have a special spot in my heart, but I mean, he's part of my company too, which is kind of a testament to how great I think he is.
Yeah. And it's special to have those people around you who aren't afraid to push back, because that's really what you want and need.
Yeah. I think a lot of people seem to think that mentorship is like just somebody giving you advice. And I don't believe that to be true in any way, shape, or form. It's someone who's pushing you. I want someone who's going to continually tell me that I need to not necessarily do better, but like their expectation of me is slightly above what I'm giving them right now.
So you gave me the most wonderful gift recently, which was a comic book. Was that your idea or was that Idris's idea?
No, it was mine.
Okay.
All of the random stuff that comes out of our shop, it's all me. I love doing random things. I love doing random. It fuels me. I think it fuels my creativity in a way that just like doesn't feel forced. I don't feel like I'm a creative person, but like when I get an idea and it seems really, really cool and viable to me, I hold on to it. So the comic book was something that I actually thought of, I want to say like 5 years ago. That it took us like that long just to get there. And it was just a matter of just having the right team in place. And then I finally saw the assets sitting there and I was like, oh my God, I could use you guys now. And like our graphic designer just ran with it. She had the best time ever doing it. And just watching her take that leadership position was like, okay, now I feel more confident for you in the future. So it was like a nice little way for me to kind of test out my team for leadership stuff, which was really cool. I loved that comic book. I'm so happy to hear that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, totally. So let's talk about Brian Smith of Blue Train. And some would say that you would credit him for your whole career. That's a big statement. So we'd love to know what's special about Brian.
So Brian is the owner of Blue Train Marketing. I think it might be the end. It's Blue Train. So they're also, I mean, in technicality, they're a competitor, but they're kind of full service. Brian is somebody that I met, I want to say in, 2013? Something like that, like long enough that I've forgotten. I'd finished my Google Ads certification and the analytics as well. And I started looking for jobs. And obviously Google Ads was the natural progression. So I applied for a position as an account manager because I was like, at that point, I had no idea what I was doing. I just needed a job. Like that was literally the only end game. I remember that day so vividly. I remember what I wore. I remember everything. It's so weird. I get to the office and we're doing the interview and I'm telling him what I'm really, really interested in and all that stuff. He shows me the office and then I'm off on my way. And then I get a call from him later that night and he goes, Ameet, I've been thinking about it. And he's like, I don't think you're an account manager. And I go, okay. And he goes, you sound like an analyst. And he's like, really, at this point, we're looking for an account manager. I might have a position for an analyst open for you. Let me see if I can create the work. And unfortunately, at that time, he just wasn't able to create that work for me. But like that little sentence right there was like, oh, I get it now. I'm not supposed to be applying for like these jobs where I'm taking care of the client. I'm supposed to be the one who's working behind the scenes. And that really kind of shaped everything in that sense where I was like, oh, okay, now I need to make this iteration and go down this PPC route. And that's exactly what I did. So yeah, I think Brian Smith is the person to credit for at least, I would say at least 80% of how I ended up here. Frankly, because if he hadn't said you're an analyst, I don't know if I would have ended up here. I think I might have continued trying to be like an account manager because that required less experience at that time.
Wow. And if you think about it, because, you and I, we both interview people. And how often do we think about, obviously, for an interview, we're trying to figure out like, okay, is this person going to work or not? But like sometimes just being honest, and because sometimes it's scary to be honest in an interview, like maybe be better this way or that. Like that changed your whole trajectory. It just shows you how powerful that interaction is. And maybe I'm talking to myself here, not you, but like we can take more responsibility of like, oh my gosh, we got to be careful when we do these interviews because it could really change someone's life to the good or to the bad.
Yeah. And actually in regards to even that, so I'm very active on Instagram, or I was, I should say, at one point where I was constantly doing stories. And I mean, we still create content on Instagram. It's just that my attention has been split now. But I remember at one point I used to talk to so many of like my followers because I had done more stories. And there was this one person who was also doing Google ads. And we'd talk about ads like all the time. And I'd tell her what I was up to and all this great stuff. And then all of a sudden I didn't hear from her for maybe about, I want to say like 4 to 6 months or something, long enough that I had noticed that she was kind of gone. And then I went back to try to find her and her account wasn't anywhere. And I was like, I wonder what happened. So randomly, I opened up my phone and there's a message from like a new account on Instagram or whatever. And I open it up and it's that person. And the message basically read, I switched careers, Ameet. And I was like, and then literally it was just, I saw how much passion and how much love you had for PPC. And I realized that I didn't match it anywhere close to that. And that must mean something. So wow. She's like, I do content now and I'm significantly happier. And like that story stays with me years and years and years. And I was like, that was my good thing that I did. That was the one good thing that I did with my career was the fact that I helped somebody see that maybe it wasn't for them as much as I want people to. I mean, my whole platform is trying to encourage people to kind of start doing their ads themselves or for clients or whatever. But it was just, a really cool moment for me where I was just like, oh, like I did that. Like that was really cool. Like I don't know. It was really cool. I did that.
Yeah. I like to say that we get more when we give, right? So when you can actually see that I've actually been able to give and create opportunities for other people, there's nothing greater than that. So you were blessed to have that, just to know about it, right? Because it could have just went on and you had no clue, right? Just like, oh, she just disappeared.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I thought. I was just like, oh, she just went off into her own like freelancing career bubble, whatever else you want to call it. And Yeah, when she came back, it was really truly a great gift that she was able to give me.
So now switching the tables and you being the mentor. So I know you're not actively mentoring anyone, but naturally you have your team, you have the content that you put out there. Do you want to talk a little bit about like how you interact with people and mentor them, even if it's not officially?
I think my interactions are like what I hope to come off as is like kind of your good friend, I don't want to say best friend because I feel like for me calling someone my best friend means something. Like, so I want to be like that really good friend that you're able to go to. I get messages a lot and I try to respond to them as much as I possibly can. And more often than not, people will be like, oh, I messaged like 4 other people and they never responded. And I was like, at the very least, if I know I could help you, I'm going to try. And that's just mainly because like I don't know, because I was there. Like I was literally like I still put myself in those scenarios where I'm like, I remember when I was completely clueless and I had no idea, and this random person helped me figure this out, and that random person helped me figure that out. And the amount of clarity and the reduction in anxiety that it helped, even if it was like a 1-word sentence of like, no, you're doing it wrong. Like at least I knew. Then I can move off and try to find another solution. So I kind of just try to take that same approach where it's just a nice, safe, easy place to come to ask your questions however you want. But the feeling that I want you to walk out with is like, oh, I just had a friend, like my friend gave me some advice versus like somebody that, I don't know. I think I put people on pedestals a lot. And that's just naturally because for me, I want to gravitate towards that. Like that's the person I want to be. But I just hate it when people put me there. I don't like it. It's a really weird feeling. So then I just try to make it seem as safe and like as like you're just talking to your peer, you're just talking to your friend as much as I possibly can, just so that way they can ask questions without feeling that little bit of embarrassment that you do when you're asking questions. So that's kind of my approach, is that I try to bring it down as much as I possibly can in a way that I'm hoping doesn't make that person feel horrible at the end of it all. I mean, most people come back, so I'm assuming that I'm doing it correctly, but I don't know for sure.
So when dealing with your team, there's obviously a fine line between micromanaging and then also course correcting. So how do you make sure that you do more of the latter and less of the former?
I think realizing that you've hired adults is a big piece to it. And that's something that I echo back to my team very, very often, where I was like, my expectation is that you are an adult. You have your task, you have your job, you do it at the best of your capability within the hours that we have already laid out for you. And that's it. And I think that really, really works well because I don't sit there and say, hey, you have to be online at 9 a.m. every single day. Hey, you have to work full 40 hours every single week. As long as you get your job done, I don't care. So then that really helps with like that pressure of feeling like they have to do quantity versus quality. So most of the work that comes out of our house is like, I know this is going to sound a little cocky, but like really great work because I give them that time. I literally bake in, even when I'm doing like hour allotments for like accounts, I bake in that time where there's like 10 hours of like, who knows what's going to happen this week. And like a lot of agency owners that I've spoken to in the past are like, that's ridiculous. Like you're just giving them 40 hours a week to do nothing. And I'm like, yeah, in that 40 hours a week, they're probably going to do some reading. They're going to probably sleep a little bit. They're going to go hang out with their kid, maybe exercise. And I'm like, they're significantly happier. But when they come back on Monday, I'm like, guess what happens? I get the best work out of them.
Yeah.
They spot that error 2 days before I was there, anybody else would have. Like those little things add up. And I think that really, really helps, especially with the mentorship side of it, is just making sure that I don't have to micromanage them when you've given them the autonomy to do what they feel like is the best option. So like really giving them the opportunity to make decisions without me having to be involved is a really big thing that we're working on this year, where I feel like some people are still kind of in this phase of like, let me ask Ameet before I publish this or ask Ameet before I do this. And I love that they care that much. But eventually at some point, I'm going to have to sit there and be like, you own this department now. Your decision. Whether we sink or swim on this like part of it has to be yours, because like there's only so much that I can do as an owner after a certain point as well. So yeah, for me, it's really empowering them to make their decisions and then really, really going back and telling them that I trust them, because that's the other piece of it. Like I can tell you that you're more than welcome to make that decision, but if I'm not following it up with like, I trust your judgment, you're going to constantly think about it. So I just go back to how I wish I was treated as an employee at an agency and literally just do that.
And naturally, it also means that you're okay when they make mistakes, right? Or, and letting them know that, like, hey, naturally, if I'm giving you this, it could mean that you're going to make some mistakes, but you know what? That's how you learn and that's how you grow.
Yeah, for me, a mistake is fine as long as you learn from it. If it happens again and again, then we have a problem. Like that's when we're going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Mean Ameet is not somebody you want to be around. They haven't seen her yet, and I hope that they don't have to.
I think that's going to be like the second version of your comic book when Mina Meat comes out, but in a good way.
That's
like in a
actually
good
a really
way. It's
good
like
idea.
to save the world, right? Not we don't have to fire anyone.
I might have to steal that from you.
You know what? It's all good. Okay, let's pivot to AI. So recently you did a study on human versus AI generated ad copy and would love to talk about it. So what was the goal of the study, and tell me a little bit about it?
So the goal of the study was more or less curiosity, really, for me. I think especially when it comes to tests and stuff like that, I think what everybody will realize is that most of the stuff I end up doing is more for just answering my own random questions. So Google had at that point had just recently announced that Gen AI was coming into Google Ads, and I was like, I wonder if AI actually could perform better than human. And then I sat there and kind of just started going down that rabbit hole, and I was like, at this point, we have no way to definitively know. So I was like, okay, here's $500. Let's find out. Admittedly, the budget was super low. The timeline was super short. Like, there's a lot of caveats to this, but like what the information gave us was actually pretty telling in the sense of like you can't remove us from the content writing side of things quite yet. So in terms of like results and stuff like that, I think we saw, oh gosh, I have to remember this off the top of my head now. In terms of clicks, AI had gotten 26, human had gotten 65, impressions was 713 compared to 1,036. CTR difference was 3.65 compared to 4.85. And then the CPC, which one was like the biggest difference, I think it was 605 to 485. In all accounts, human kicked AI's butt every single time on every single metric. And what that kind of just told me was that one, even the way that we wrote the ads, maybe not super duper different from what AI had done. What we've learned is that emotional context and just understanding how humans talk is not something that AI is quite able to figure out quite yet. Will it be? Maybe. I don't know, right? Like we've got moments of it, everyone talking about how it's going to become sentient and stuff like that. But then I'm like, at that point, wouldn't it know how to converse like I can go down that rabbit hole pretty hard. But yeah, so the test basically just showed us that. But then I think really where my mind started going even further was like, okay, well, what about algorithmic biases and the data privacy side of things and all of this other stuff with biases? Like if we're putting in the wrong data, then naturally that's going to perpetuate. And even Carnegie Mellon, I think it was, I want to say 2016, discovered that with ads where like high paying ads were being disproportionately shown to Caucasian men versus women. And that was really jarring. And I just sat there and I was like, okay, well, what else is there? Like what else could be there? So I think there's going to be another version of this test somewhere. I just haven't quite figured out what exactly it is, but there's something there. I know that there's something there. So that's going to be really, really interesting just to see it kind of evolve, because eventually like I feel like the Gen I side of it's gonna end up in like the AARs, and that's when things are gonna get really, really scary. And I'm a little petrified for it. Somebody asked me to do like a 2025 predictions list, and I was like, what happens here? Like no one's talking about it right now, or at least I don't feel like they are. And I'm like, my mind, like the amount of anxiety that's in my body just thinking about that, where the auto recommendations are just going to go out and they're going to just publish out this content that was written by AI based off of like whatever the website said, even if it's like yeah, small business owners that don't know how to exclude pages. Those kind of things are just kind of what's looming in my head when it comes to AI in the industry. But then also, how do we stay accountable? Yeah, we could probably have a 4-hour conversation about this very easily. Very easily.
Related, but not directly related. So I recently did a video for my academy, just running through Meta, setting up a campaign. And it's been a while since me personally, I've gone through a Meta campaign. And I know we're talking about Google Ads, but the point is, I can't tell you how hard it was and how much work it was to actually opt out of all of the AI recommendations. So like automatic sound, automatic music, different filters. I mean, it's insane. But if you think about it, your average person, right? They're not going to know. They're just like, oh yeah, click on Advanced Plus, click, right? And then it's just going to go. And what it creates is a monster, like really. So yeah, I have that fear just like you, where it's just not there yet, but they're pushing it so much, and like, ooh, and it's just not good for the average user.
It's not, and I just worry about the small business owner that doesn't have an agency or a freelancer or someone looking out for them, or even like the the owners that unfortunately work with those agencies that don't care enough to check. Like those are the ones that I really, really worry about, because I'm like, when we're talking about brand safety, there's a lot of implications on that side of things. Who holds the liability? Like, and Google and Meta both are very great at absolving themselves from any kind of liability, right? So then at that point, you're kind of sitting there going, okay, well, now what? Like, what do we do? And today's PPC chat was about, like, do we leave these platforms? But then how do we leave these platforms, especially if they're returning for the customer, but they're not ethical? And then you're just going down all of these other random rabbit holes. And I'm like, this is probably the most complex this industry has ever gotten. When I started, we were just kind of trying to argue about adding close variants. Like, I remember the Larry Kim article that told us about close variants. Like, it's like it happened yesterday. And I just sit there and I'm like, that was my main concern. Like 10 years ago was, is exact match going to stay exact match? And now we have that answer. But like, now I'm sitting here looking at AI and I'm like, but what's the answer at the end of it? Because like it only got worse for us. So like, is this going to follow suit, or do we see improve? Like, I don't know. I got doomsday.
No, it's true. And like, I think about it the same way, especially when there's like a lot of commentary from people, for a lot of this is our livelihood, right? It's not like that there's an easy replacement for Meta or Google, right? So it's kind of like, what are the options? And it's very easy to stand up and say, oh, it's evil. But I always like wonder, the people who stand up and say that, like if they lost those two platforms today, like would they be okay? It's hard. It's really hard.
But even just adding the complexity of being an agency owner, I don't know how big your team is, but I have 8 other people working for me that rely on me to feed their families, pay their rent, all that stuff. And that's not a responsibility that I take lightly. So then naturally my mind goes into the pessimistic side of things, because I'm like, well, how do I prevent this from happening? Or how do I best protect ourselves?
Yeah.
Right? Because we've already gone through pretty horrible events that thankfully we've been able to survive. But like, as an owner who has constantly had to go to battle and war, I don't know how much I have left in me as well. Right. So then there's like all of these random little plays in the mix of everything. And then it was something that I was talking to Julie about earlier today, where I was just like, I don't know what to do anymore. Like before, the outline was a little bit clearer. If this happens, then we have to do this. If this happens, we have to do this. But I'm like, now we have, not to bring in politics, but to bring in politics, right? We have like new leadership coming into the state. All of the moves that Meta has made over the last several weeks seems to be very much kissing the ring type of deal. I wonder how many other CEOs are going to follow. I wonder what those implications are going to be. What happens to TikTok? Is it going to be bought by Elon Musk, like some of the reports are saying? Or are they actually going to just admit defeat and just walk out of the States and essentially Canada? Which frankly, like for world affairs, I would prefer at this point. But like from an advertising standpoint, there are so many D2C brands that rely on TikTok. And I just sit there and I'm like I can't give you my opinion either way, because both sides of the implications are just not great. It's like almost like an election where you just have two parties and neither of the candidates are great options. So you're picking the lesser of two evils, right? Which feels like what voting is these days. It's basically just turning into the ad industry. Where do we put our votes? Where do we put our money? And that's where I just I don't know what to do with that anymore, especially with clients who don't quite understand those little tiny intricacies and maybe they don't care. And that's totally fine. But yeah.
It's a lot.
Terrified. It's a lot.
Just one more last point on the subject. I have a close friend, a young guy who's actually on the podcast, and he runs a TikTok agency. Like that's what he specializes in. And I'm even scared to ask him, what are you going to do? And as much as he's trying to branch out to other social platforms, but he's killing it on TikTok, and it's hard, so yeah, that's why you and I or other agency owners, especially in 2025, we're looking at where are the holes? What do we got to do? And like you said, we have that huge responsibility on our shoulders. I don't know if everyone agrees to that. We've seen agencies last year who just sell the thing and then suddenly everyone's out of a job. but there are people who do care. And we've got to protect ourselves and our people. So it's definitely complex.
Yeah, it's not an easy one, unfortunately. I think it's going to be multi-year before I'm able to form some kind of answer that's a little bit more concrete. So maybe we do this in 2 years and see if I have an answer for you.
I'm glad to do that. So pivoting a little bit over to agency, on LinkedIn, you recently shared a story about keeping up appearances when going through tough times. Can you share your strategy on finding a balance between authenticity and appearances? And I'm not trying to imply that you aren't authentic, but it's hard, right? We go through tough times, and just to let it all out, be like, we're suffering here. It's hard. Like, it's a balance. So how did you deal with that, or how do you feel like one can deal with that?
So I'm going to take us back about 2.5 years ago. So June 2022 was probably the most significant month in my business, and probably a date that I'm never going to forget, which is just unfortunate. Our business manager on Meta got hacked. It spent 50 million, or not 50 million, sorry, 50,000
Are you serious?
dollars. Yeah, it was bad. I was across like, I want to say about 7 accounts or something
Oh
like
my
that over the
God.
time frame. And this is when Meta had just announced that they had basically cut down their customer service. So it used to be great, and then it was just not. So I basically got to watch these hackers for a whole week make changes in the account, literally in real time. I was literally watching them do this, and I couldn't do anything. And I'm sitting there in chat with them going, I'm watching them. Like, they're doing this. I still have access to that. Just look at the time frame. When was this person added? They shouldn't have been. Why are they spending this money? And why is it in a different language than what the account was doing beforehand? Like, there's really easy safety checks that Meta could do to prevent this nonsense from happening. They just chose not to. But going back to the question, because I'm going to go off on another tangent if I don't. So then that basically ended up happening. And I think that was the first moment where I actually really realized that I can't bottle it in anymore. I used to keep it because, like, obviously social media is the place where you take your highlight reel, right? You go and you sit there and you're like, look at this vacation I went on. Look at my husband. Look at my boyfriend. Look at this bag that I have. All these wonderful things. Let me curate it perfectly so you think my life is just like wonderful. And I fell into the same thing where I was like, well, if nobody else is talking about their problems, they must not be having them. That's the natural assumption that you make. And then eventually when I started talking about June 2022 and everyone started realizing how truly horrible it was for me, that's when a lot of people were like, oh, I had this really hard time, or I had this really hard time, or I did this and this didn't work out for me. And I think that's when I realized that, like, I think I had surpassed being somebody that people were just randomly following to somebody that they were actually actively following. And that was a really weird one for me because I never set out, like, at the start of this, you said that I'm one of the most influential in the, like, that was never my goal. Like, I just never, like, it's weird to hear that. Like, it's really strange to hear that. But then I think that's when I started realizing that there was some value in the content that I was actually creating outside of PPC. So I started adding little bits and pieces of like, okay, well, this is where I'm sitting at mental health wise. This is where I'm sitting at here. And that also really helped me figure out how to communicate with my team. And I think my team is probably where it really started, where I just sat there and I was like, I don't want to do anything today. I want to go back to bed and I want to cry. That's all I want to do. And everybody be like, go ahead, do it. And then I would do it the same next week. And I would do it again and again and again. And then eventually it turned into, okay, I still don't want to do anything, but I'm going to try. And then eventually it just kind of kept on going. And I was like, okay, so this progression that they're watching me go through was really helpful for them because I noticed that they started opening up more to me. So I was like, if I take this online, what happens? So then that was kind of just like the thought process of like, okay, maybe I should be talking about how horrible things are for me, not in the sense of wanting sympathy, but really giving everyone a very balanced view of what it really takes to run a business and an agency and what it feels like to be a solo owner versus someone who has a partnership or multiple partners and stuff like that. It's very isolating. And it's really like, I mean, if we talked very like about 2022, like in a very like detailed manner, guaranteed I'd probably still cry about it. Like I could still kind of feel my emotion. It's just that I'm able to kind of keep this one back this time. But like it was it was just such a horrible time. And I think that was the tipping point for me in terms of like, okay, my content needs to change. Everybody needs to see how horrible this is. So that way, if they choose to still make that same decision, they're making one that's very educated. So now when people come to me and they're like, hey, Ameet, I want to start my own agency. What you're probably expecting me to say is like, oh, I love running my agency, all of this stuff. The first thing that comes out of my mouth is like, this is the worst thing on the planet sometimes. And they'll just sit there and they're like, what did you? And I'm like, no, trust me. Like some days you literally are like, why did I do this to myself? Like it's just, that's just what happens. But then you have the same thing in a job. It's just that all of that weight's on you now, right? So yeah, for me, it's very much a concerted effort of being like, okay, I need to make sure that as I talk about all of these wonderful things that are happening in my life, I need to make sure that people understand that sometimes it's not always like this. Just because I'm in a phase of my life where like it's just overly abundant right now and it's just so wonderful. I did go through like 7 years of complete trash beforehand, right? Like there needs to be that side of it. And just like what we were saying earlier today, right? You can only enjoy the good if you've had some bad. And I think that's just kind of where I really want to echo that to everybody, where running a business is just like life. It's going to ebb and flow. Sometimes you're super passionate and sometimes you're not. Sometimes you really love it and sometimes you actually kind of want to get out. And I had a 2-year period where I thought about that every single day. Do I want to continue this or not? I don't know if this is going to sound weird, but I've always like had something in my body that just says that I'm meant for more. Like I've always kind of said that. Like I've always said that I'm built differently. And I don't mean it in like an elitist way. I just mean like something about me just doesn't feel like this is it, if that makes sense.
No, I think it's a natural spark to being like, okay, like I've got this purpose, I got this mission. I don't know if I've filled it yet, and I need to still keep searching for it. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think in our life, I think we have micro missions, but then we also have the bigger mission. Sometimes we don't know what that was until we're 120 years old, right? But that's how we got to
hopefully we figure that out a little bit sooner than that.
Exactly. But I'm a big believer we're here for a purpose. And therefore it's very true that there's going to be something inside of you pushing you in a certain direction. And more often than not, you need to listen to yourself and you'll know whether you're in the right spot or not. So I think that's fair. The only thing I was thinking also while you were talking was, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Yes, I also have those really, really hard days. For me, I've got a beard, so I can like look at my videos from 2020 and 2024 and see how gray I've gotten. So I've got like more like a measurement, like, oh man, that must have been a bad year because, oh, sheesh. But I'm just joking. But you're right. There's definitely those hard days. And I think that's why it's helpful to have people to talk with, right? Because if we just were on our own, it'd be very hard and I think we'd give up. But having, loved ones or it's mentors or, certain individuals in the company who may not be an owner, but at least it's someone you feel comfortable sharing with. We need people, right? Anyone who's on their own, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't. And especially for sounding boards and stuff like that. Like I love using people just to talk to the, and when I say using people, I don't mean like using them, but like I've loved that conversation because sometimes it might spark something in them or it might spark something in me. For me, like my favorite thing in the entire world is going outside where I don't know anybody and just having random conversations. And my whole thesis behind that is just like, if I could put a smile on someone's face for 2 seconds, I've done my job. Like I've done my good deed. I can continue walking because I know that if I've made you laugh, I was laughing too. You know what I mean? So then I just take that and I just sit there and I'm like, okay, I might be feeling really, really not great about this at work, but I can make myself feel better somewhere else. And I think it's just that balance that a lot of people just seem to think that like business is all in all the time. And again, 2 years ago taught me that that's not it. You can't be working your business 24/7 and still yield the results. I tried, it didn't work. Like it took me 11 months and 2 days to get us back to remotely close to where we were when we got hit. That was a year. Like literally, that was just a year of me just going hyper time because I had no choice. It was my reputation or I quit. And I was not going to quit. So then for me, it was just one of those options. But then I think showing everybody that like, this is what it takes, that you're constantly pounding the pavement for 11 months and 2 days. Is this worth it for you? Is this something that you think you'd be able to go to sleep every single night knowing that, yes, I support the decision that I made and I'm very happy with the decision I made? Or would you sit there and be like, I don't think I should have done that? And I think that kind of gave a lot of people some insight into whether or not they wanted to push further than freelancing or if they even wanted to go into freelancing. And I hate that I had to go through that for them to kind of start thinking about it. But I also hate that I went through that to even realize that I needed to talk about my mental health and talk about these moments where I didn't maybe act exactly the way that I wanted to. Just to keep up appearances was just really eye-opening for me. So now it's more or less of like, I sit there and I go, is this performative or is this real? And that's usually like the question that I go back and forth with all the time. And that kind of helps me maintain that nice little level because some of it is performative. I'm not going to lie here, right? Like some of it, I just want to make myself feel good. So I'm going to do it. Like, that's just the long and short of it.
You're human.
Yeah, exactly. But most of the content that I try to put out, I just sit there and I'm like, okay, is this me actually wanting to talk about this, or is this me trying to like get sympathy? And then if it's the latter, then more often than not, I axe that content and then I just continue going.
Love it. I think that's an amazing barometer. So before we wrap up, I want to get into our top 3. Before we had the call, sounds like you have lots of cool interests. So I'm going to say a category and tell me what you think of or what you enjoy right now specifically. So number 1, books.
Oh my gosh, I just love turning my brain off and just reading and learning something new. I think that's just really cool. So the way that I do this is audiobook with the physical book.
Really?
I feel like my comprehension is like significantly higher.
I love that. I had never even thought about that.
I heard it I think listening to the Alex Hormozi book, I can't remember which one it was, but one of them sometime in 2023. And he had made that mention where he's like, I do audiobook with the real book. And I was like, I wonder, because I know that my mind wanders, right? Like, again, analyst, I'm thinking 20, 50, possibly a million different things at one moment. So I was like, how do I combat that? Like, how do I keep focused? And for me, it was like, okay, even if my mind starts to wander, at least I'm hearing it. Like, I'll still pick it up in some way. And that's been really, really cool. I've really, really loved it. I recently finished my last book. I think it was The Revenge of the Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And I enjoyed that read. I totally understand everybody's criticism towards it. It's not as in depth, but I kind of like the eagle view of all of it. I think that's kind of interesting just to sit there and be like, oh, so we saw that coming and then we didn't do anything. So that's been, I think that's really just the cool part for me, is just being able to figure out what works for me, which is basically reading twice at one point, which might be something cool for you to try.
I know. I can't tell you how I'm excited about that idea, because we'll talk about this another time, but yeah, I need it. That's great.
Yeah, totally fair.
All right. Football.
What I'm excited about, the Detroit Lions. What I'm not excited about is the Dallas Cowboys. But they are saying that Deion Sanders might become our coach. I wouldn't hate that. Did I like McCarthy in that position? No, not at all. I called him to be gone after that Packers game last year. Gee, like, what the F was that? I'm still mad about that game. So I'm going to stop myself now. I'm really mad about that game. That game was pathetic. But he should have been gone last year.
Yeah, if Deion comes along, I think it's going to change everything. So I'm excited for that opportunity as well.
I'm hoping that he'll have the Dan Campbell effect on them. I think I really love how like military precision the Lions kind of feel. Like, even you're watching them like do their lineups, like they're on point. Like, every single person, same beat, same. I love it. Like, absolutely, I just love it. And I was like, if Deion Sanders could bring something like that to the Cowboys, I would be just so happy. I would be so happy.
Last category, music.
Oh gosh, I listen to everything.
But like
sometimes
favorite
it's classical.
genre? Is you have like a favorite?
Ooh, I would say like rock is kind of where my heart goes to. So think of like the Alexis on Fire's, Billy Talent, Screamo in the back. Like, there needs to be a Screamo singer there. Like, I love that. I think I'm naturally just someone who feels like my emotions are pretty intense. Just like, that's just the long and short of it. And like that kind of music, just like, it just feels so good in my core where I can just scream into it and just feel like I'm releasing everything, good or bad. And it's just like absolutely amazing. But Alexis on Fire is like the band that has my heart. Like, I don't think I get like starstruck outside of like a few PPC people very often, but like if Alexis on Fire ended up anywhere remotely close to me, I would pass out, no doubt.
Well, I mean, this was an awesome conversation. I seriously feel like you're a sister from another mother.
I love that.
Thank you so much for coming here. And it's so cool how we've, met recently. And yeah, so this is just really, really great. So thanks for being a guest on the Digital Marketing Mentor. And thank you, listeners, for tuning into the Digital Marketing Mentor. We'll speak with you next time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Marketing Mentor podcast. Be sure to check us out online at thedmmentor.com and at the DM Mentor on Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts for more marketing mentor magic. See you next time.